Hi, Craig. Welcome back to the Free Speech Cage.
Good morning, Max. Good to be here. Thanks for turning the heat on.
Yeah, it's cold over here. Anyway, the
I had toes when I got up this morning. I'm not sure where they went.
yeah, it is seriously cold here. So today we're going to sort of go back because we haven't talked about your actual real life experience in trying to get the vote out down in Georgia.
Trying to protect the vote, trying to get the vote out in Georgia, in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, a little bit in New Hampshire. Yeah, absolutely. Those are important things.
Right, because as I said the last time, I feel that the problem, what's going on in Minnesota, what's going on in many places, is just voting that we didn't get the right people in to protect these things, and now they're not protected. And I think if Americans knew back then, when you were down in Georgia, what would happen today, well, that's a question. Do you think things would have been different, or what was the challenges that you were facing?
So Georgia, when I was doing, we call it voter protection, VoPro. When I was doing, and it's essentially non-denominational, but it's heavily Democratic, maybe overwhelmingly or universally Democratic in terms of who's organizing and involved in protecting the vote. And the theme is if more people vote, you get Democratic victories. That's the theme. It turns out that didn't quite happen in 2024. And we're also seeing changes in who's using mail-in votes and who's using early votes. And I think Democrats need to be really careful that they're learning the right lessons from the past and looking at the right data to plan for the future. So to go back to Georgia, which was, I think, 6 years ago, I was down there for the midterms. Or maybe it's 4 years ago, whenever it was. Couldn't have been 4 years ago. I was down there. You and I did a show at the time. I was in Fulton County, and I stayed with a friend in Kearsarge or someplace like that. And every day, I'd get up and I'd drive, because everywhere there you got to drive. I would drive to a polling center someplace. And they were usually community rec centers, sometimes libraries, churches, maybe not any churches, but schools. And my job as a voter protection person, I had a thing that I hung on my neck that said voter protection volunteer, and I'd go in and I'd introduce myself to the people who are running the voting operation, the actual poll workers, and they'd say, "Great, you're here. You can stand over there or sit over there. We've got chairs for you. You can't interfere with anyone." And I did this for weeks, right? Every day you and I would talk for an hour on that show. And you'd always ask me, what's going on? What are you seeing? And I would say, well, I got a bird, I got a dog, I got a pretty view of the river. But in the training, it was all about what to do when the folks with guns show up and hang out outside, or when the state police show up and hang out outside the polling booth, or when cars start getting towed. And you hear of Georgia. Georgia doesn't allow people to help folks in line with like water and food. I don't know why they do that, but you get hooked on that. You're like, oh my God, they're suppressing the vote by not giving water to people who are in lines. And I know Georgia's had some long lines. I didn't see any of that. I saw a lot of empty buildings where people just park, walk in, and vote. So in Georgia, I think maybe one person got to vote because I was there, because there was some confusion about whether they were eligible. And the same thing happened in Philadelphia in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, what I remember, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that you were actually extraordinarily impressed with the professionalism of everybody you met in those voting centers.
Absolutely, Max. So now I've spent, I don't know, maybe a total of 9 weeks over 3 election cycles in New Hampshire. Cambridge also, as a former city councilor there, I had a lot of experience with the election commission and the poll workers. Doesn't quite count, but nonetheless, they're poll workers. And certainly in Georgia, I was there for about 5 weeks, and also in Philadelphia at the start of their early voting. Same thing with Georgia's early voting. I was there for maybe 5 weeks. Talked to countless poll workers. I got to see them interact with people. I talked with gazillions of folks going in and going out. The people who were there working professionally absolutely knew what they were doing. Beyond impressed at all of them.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I feel that the voting thing is just another one of these red herring distractions to the real issues.
So I think voter suppression's a real thing. So we've had that in America throughout our history, right? Women couldn't vote, black people couldn't vote, uh, black people were given the right to vote, at least black men, and then still couldn't vote because you've got all sorts of different literacy laws or property laws or whatever. Now felons can't vote, right? Convicted felons can't vote in a lot of places. So we have an awful lot of restrictions. There's ideas that maybe everyone should, there's a whole Republican program to force folks to show picture IDs and proof of citizenship when you go vote. All of that is important to pay attention to. I don't put any, I mean, we have this whole stop the steal lie that Trump has been promoting and still does with his taking of the Fulton County electoral records. Um, but that's only a small piece of the pie. Democrats didn't lose in 2024 because votes were suppressed. They lost because their messaging sucked, because their candidate couldn't connect with people. It's as wonderful, I think, Kamala Harris would have been as a president. So, yes, pay attention to the steal, because Republicans gerrymandering everything they can do. They will try and steal the midterms and anything else that's not nailed down, right? But don't think that's the big piece of the pie. The big piece of the pie is what are Democrats selling.
Right. So, like, bring us forward now to when you were down in Philadelphia recently, and what? Yeah, tie those two together.
So when I was in Philadelphia, I was also doing voter protection work. Now, they didn't give me a thing that said volunteer. So at one point in life, someone took a picture of me and said, "Who's this guy pretending to be an election worker?" I forget exactly what the thing they gave me was. It said, voter assistance or something, but it didn't say volunteer voter assistance. And the next thing you know, I was doxxed, 10,000 comments and 100,000 views or something with my address. My wife was so nervous, understandably, that she called the police and said, "Hey," other people had called the police for us ahead of her. But I was out front talking to voters, and we were there for, God, I was there for 4 weeks. And for the first 3.5 weeks, it was crickets. I would sit there, I had a stool, I had my clipboard, I'd been trained on Pennsylvania voter laws, this and that. And I'd just sit there and read my book. I figure out what I was reading. And every 15 minutes, someone would walk in. And then when they came out, I would stand up and say, "Hey, did you have any problems voting?" "No, it was great. No, it was great. No, it was great." Every once in a while, and there was a Republican would say, "Well, I can't vote because Pennsylvania had a different way of voting than Georgia." So I'm not casting a vote. What they were doing is, I forget the exact terminology, but their votes wouldn't have been counted that day. They were put in a bag and then counted up on election day. And sometimes that bothered Republicans, and they thought they were going to get stolen. And I watched the people coming in with the mail-in votings, or not mail-in, as a voter drop-off box that you could not mail, you could not drop off your ballot. You could fill out your ballot inside the voting precinct house, but you had to drop it in the ballot box outside. People are like, "Oh, that's going to be corrupt." And then, somewhere someone put some gasoline in one of these things and lit it on fire. 50 ballots may have been impacted. The things were under camera surveillance. They were bolted to the ground. They were locked. They were emptied every day with 2 people watching. I saw this countless times at different voting polling booths. There was no way that stuff was going to be stolen. I mean, absent some massive scheme. So I think we worried about the wrong stuff. It's important to protect the vote. In Pennsylvania, it was important to protect the vote. But it was more important to get the vote in the first place. And that's where Democrats just, in my opinion, didn't have the energy. The Republicans did the messaging. And we're seeing that now with the indivisible stuff, with the mobilized stuff, with the visibility brigades and folks out with their anti-ICE, with their Save Greenland, with their Trump's plundering America signs. Like, controlling messaging is important. But if you don't have the votes in the first place, there's not much for you to protect.
What I'm sort of curious about is that, maybe it's a little bit of a tangent, But the states are supposed to have the primary power in the country. I mean, that's how it was founded, right? I mean, federalism has always been we'll try to work together, but it's secondary. That's my reading of state rights. But my big question, I guess, is that why doesn't the Minnesota, or why don't any of these states basically say to ICE, we will arrest you if you do anything even remotely wrong?
Max, that's not a tangent. That's a complete right turn. I thought when you started talking about states' rights and whatnot, you were going to go into some of what we talked about earlier, which is, and we'll get to Minnesota in a moment, but one thing that's important for people to know is when you vote, I live in Cambridge, right? So I vote in Cambridge. And I always vote in Cambridge. And then before that, I voted in Wellesley. So I've always voted in Massachusetts. And we vote in a certain way. And I just kind of thought, everyone does this. And when you start seeing how different places handle the voting differently for national elections, you'd think that there'd be some standard. But it goes back to the whole hanging Chad thing in Florida in the Gore-Bush election. Who knew that they had hole punches back then? Now, I was punching papers at work the other day, and after like 15, 20 batches, it started sticking. And I thought, man, hanging chads, it's a real physical thing. No one in Massachusetts would have thought about it back then because we kind of figured that everyone does it the same way. The local ability to control elections, whether it's the gerrymandering that's going on, we're seeing mostly driven by Republicans to alter the House elections in 2026, or simply the layout of the ballot, the famous butterfly ballot in Florida. Every place has a different set of ballots. So when I was at someplace in Georgia, it was a county. These counties are huge, right? And depending on where you lived in the county, sure, you all were voting for the same senator, you were all voting for the same president, although I wasn't there for a presidential election. But your ballot on Green Street may include the senator, a House representative, the governor, and a water board person and some school board people and whatever. The guy that lives on Elm Street in the same town has the same senator, the same governor, maybe a different rep, and 25 other different people because they're in a different water district. And the ballot looks completely different. And so every place you go has a different set of ballot rules, how they look, how they're tabulated, how they're stored, what your voting hours are. That's the states' rights that I thought you were talking about. As far as arresting ICE, I don't know why they can't. They should.
Well, no, I didn't make my point well. So each
Well,
state,
maybe you did. I just wanted to talk about voting.
I'm sure I didn't. So no, so each state, right, has different voting, everything, right? So each state has a completely different voting process, a completely different mindset on this stuff. But it's if the federal government comes in with agencies and does whatever it wants, it's basically saying that all the state voting stuff is performative, that the state elections don't matter whatsoever.
Well, that's what Trump wants. Trump wants us to have no voting. It is performative in his mind, or at least it should be. And that's what Republicans tend to want, is performative, because ultimately they're not popular, especially right now. They're not popular. And if people were to be given the right to vote, then there wouldn't be as many Republicans in office.
But it gets back to my question. If that's true, and I think everybody recognizes it, right? Why aren't the states physically, through use of force, protecting their power?
Sure. When the FBI goes in to Fulton County and executes a search warrant on the Fulton County Board of Elections and takes ballots, there's this primacy of law. The feds have primacy, and then the states have primacy, and then local towns have primacy. You've got all these layers of law, but the feds are the most powerful, but only supposedly in narrowly circumscribed situations. So they do not tell Fulton County how to set up their ballots or how to vote or anything like that. So where they got the ability to conduct a raid on Fulton County, someone signed the warrant. I assume it was a Trump-appointed judge. But that's all. This stuff is performative. There is no fraud.
let me put it another way. So the people that vote in these states, that vote again in their own particular way and their own feeling that they have a right to do this. I mean, Roe versus Wade, which I half agreed with, was basically saying the states are going to figure it out. Each state's going to figure it out. You don't like the abortion policy in your state, move to another state, right? That's what the Supreme Court basically said. It basically put the power back to the states. So I don't understand why the Minnesota state, unless it was corrupt, which is what I think, the will of the people, I believe there, is for the Minnesota State Police, regular police, whatever, to basically get in front of these ICE people and say, you step over that line, we will arrest you. We will use force on you. I mean, I see. Let me just show the camera so you can see you like almost laughing.
No, you're right. But what we've seen in big cities, we've seen some big city mayors say, ICE, you come here and we will F you up. You break the law, you'll go to prison. If you get convicted, you'll be arrested regardless. You'll be prosecuted. We're not going to pussyfoot around. Now, that's one of the reasons ICE is in Minneapolis and in Portland, Maine, and in Lewiston, Maine. Those are small cities, right? They show up in New York. ICE only has something like 25,000 agents. And there's been this whole discussion. ICE has become shorthand for pretty much every miserable arm of federal law enforcement, which is horrible how quickly that can become a miserable arm. They show up in New York City, and for a variety of reasons, it will not be as easy for them to control the dialogue. So they go to a much smaller city like Minneapolis. Why Governor Walz is not calling out his National Guard to bring order to the streets, the chaos and the murders that are happening because of ICE, I don't know. So I ran into a couple of local state reps the other day in Boston.
Okay, just before you get to that, well, I know because they're corrupt.
Who's corrupt? Who's corrupt?
The
Governor Walz?
Yeah, I mean not the Governor Walz, but the whole political machine there is corrupt. Right? I mean, they're all the Democrats, all the people that run for election in Minnesota are dependent either on the Democrat or the Republican Party for their funding, for their infrastructure, and for everything. So they basically are not going to get aggressive because it's the boys' club.
You forgot to wear your tin hat this morning, Max.
All right, so go to your next point.
So you use the word corrupt, and for me, Trump is corrupt. I don't think Stephen Miller is corrupt. I think Stephen Miller is just an evil, horrible, miserable incel who has just had a miserable, horrible life. And it's his anger and his rage and his pain and his shame that make him the person that he is. I don't think he's actually corrupt in the traditional sense of the word.
Let me explain it better. I live in Massachusetts. I depend on the people that live with me here in Massachusetts, the police, the state police, all the local police, to protect me. That's their job, to protect me. The federal government's job is to protect me from whatever, Russia, Iran, whatever foreign offense. That's the only reason.
No, from people in Chicago who are money laundering your bank account.
Okay, that's fine. But they're not. But if somebody physically gets close to me that can cause me bodily harm, it is my local police force's, I believe, responsibility to protect me. And they are not protecting their citizens in Minnesota.
Yes.
The people are.
No.
So like I said, the people are not corrupt. They're the ones getting shot. They're the ones going out and taking the bullets while the politicians don't direct the police to do what they're supposed to do.
I'm taking issue with your word corrupt. So what I think, I talked to these local state reps,
right,
two men I know reasonably well, at a rally, and I said, hey, when these are state reps, right? They're at the, relatively the highest levels of power in Massachusetts with a lot of access to folks that can answer these questions. So I said, and this was a rally, an anti-ICE rally. So topically it was on point here. So I said, hey guys, what happens when, not if, but when ICE comes to Boston? What's the role of the state police, of the local police, of the Massachusetts National Guard in making sure that ICE does not become this out of control, illegal, gangster type militia that we're seeing in Minneapolis? So what is the role? What happens if the National Guard from Texas comes here? What is the role of our own law enforcement / pseudo military National Guard people to keep things under control? And this one guy looks at me and he says, I don't know, you're the lawyer, you tell me.
Well, but that's
So-
exactly what I'm saying.
so I'm
that's
saying-
exactly what I'm saying.
Yes, but you're using the word corrupt. I think it's
Okay, what word do you want me to use?
lazy.
No, it's not lazy.
No, it's lazy. It's lazy. It's inattentive. I think no, they're not. They're not
No,
protecting
lazy is
their.
when nobody gets anything out of it.
They're
corrupt
not-
is when, like I
Yes.
said, corrupt is when the legislators in a state basically need more from the federal power of their political party, when that's more important to them than the job they're supposed to do for their citizens.
No, I am not disagreeing with your definition of corruption. I'm
Right.
just saying that this wasn't meeting that level of corruption. I think arguably it's worse. These are people who are not corrupt, but did not have the intellectual honesty, the moral fortitude, the interest, the energy to do their jobs, right? To do exactly what you're saying, which is to figure out how local power structures can be used under various circumstances to keep you, me, whoever safe. And to me, that's more appalling. If it were simply corrupt, that I can understand. But the idea that you run for office and that you're not corrupt, you run for office because you want to make the world a better place, because you care about justice and fairness and blah, 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 blah. And then when ICE is literally shooting people to death in Minneapolis or beating people, dragging them from cars, stuff like that. And we're having big rallies in Massachusetts about it. And then when you get asked, well, what's the state's role in keeping the lid on stuff here? You don't have an answer. You don't say, I'm working on that. You don't say, I asked the governor last night. You don't say any of that. You say, you're the lawyer. You figure it out. That's way worse than corruption, Max.
No, I agree with you there. Whatever you want to call it, it's pretty bad.
No, but I'm a lawyer, right? So
Right.
for me, laws, words are super, super important. Corruption is it's a this for that thing. Donald Trump is stunningly corrupt. To the extent that he's anything at this point in life, he is stunningly corrupt. And I can understand corruption. You can maybe root out corruption. You can change the risk-benefit analysis, make corruption not pay, right? I don't know what you do with people that don't care enough to be curious, to be proactively assessing the threats that might come down the line. I mean, for God's sakes, if we had a fire department and you went up to your fire chief and you said, we've got this new thing. It's called electricity. Everyone's got it. It's all over the country. And it's starting fires in places like Minneapolis and it requires some sort of different thinking about fire safety approach. And if the fire, what do you guys, what's the state fire agency doing about this? What are we thinking about in the building code? And the fire chief, the chief advisor for the state's fire chief looks at you and says, I don't know, you're the carpenter, you go figure it out. I mean, you'd be like, no, that's what these guys are doing. It's appalling.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me going on the pass the buck, play stupid. I'll just tell one little story for our viewers that for anybody watching at this point. But I know you hate when I say that. But anyway, remember we were in Sarah's, and I told one of it was either a councilman or a state. I can't remember who he was.
A state rep. He was a
State rep.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, on the unemployment insurance. Why did you put it out into public bonds, like private bonds through financial companies? And why didn't you shop rates? And he says, oh, well, I don't really understand that stuff. I said, well, wait, when you go shop a mortgage for your house, you understand plenty. Like, why is all that knowledge that everybody has about shopping mortgages for their houses all of a sudden non-existent when they're shopping debt for the state, for the people?
So I can answer that one, Max. I was a city councilor for 14 years. You do not understand everything that the city does or that the state does. So I don't blame someone for not having an answer in any detail to all sorts of questions you or I might ask. Now, the unemployment one, that's been in the news a fair amount. It's an immense financial liability, and you've been following it for quite a bit. the idea that he just sort of said, this isn't what I do. This isn't I don't know exactly what he does. I'm more interested in sustainability or whatever might have been his thing. Um, it's not worth it to him. And okay, maybe it's not. It wasn't in the news, but what I'm saying is even worse. It's what you said times 10, which is we now have something that's in the news all over the place. These people, these reps had come to an event on this very subject, right? This very anti-ICE subject. So it wasn't like they weren't thinking about it. So if you had run into that guy at a municipal bonds protest where people were protesting the fact that we were letting money out, and he said, "Oh, I don't know." Like, why are you even here? So, seeing these guys, why do you even have this job? Why are you even doing this job? You're at a rally. You clearly are here to be seen because you don't really care that much about the issue to figure out what is the state's role. You don't figure it out. You don't figure out the fire suppression stuff when your living room's on fire. You do it now.
But I guess what I'm saying, we're both agreeing. It's the same reaction. He wasn't like saying to me, I would have rather he said, listen, this is why we have to do it, because we believe we can get better rates through the private markets, whatever. He was just basically like...
No, Max, I just said, he didn't have that expertise.
I disagree with you. It's their job
No.
to talk to the expert and have the bullet points of the argument about why they're doing
of
something.
whatever decision the state makes for whatever question someone asks them, you could have asked them a building.
Absolutely, Craig.
No.
Then what are we paying them for? Tell me,
but
if they don't understand any of the issues, if they can't even make the
No, that's not what I said,
argument.
Max. You're expecting them to understand everything. So what if you were
No.
What if
I'm
you
not. No.
What if you
Craig,
were
stop it. I'm not asking them to understand everything. You just said when you went to ask them about what the state's reaction to ICE would be, you said they basically said, "Oh, consult a lawyer." That's exactly what I'm saying. That is not the right answer. You said it yourself,
No.
and now you're arguing against me like
No,
them giving
Max,
like
you're
not
misrepresenting
the right
what
answer.
I said.
All right.
So what I said is we were at an ICE specific event, right? It wasn't some random question out of the blue. This guy was at a coffee shop, and you asked him a bond issue question. Now, if he had been the guy on the state legislature who's just like an expert in bonds, you'd have gotten an answer. You could have probably asked him all about the state stretch code, the stretch energy code or something. They can't be experts in anything, in everything, sometimes in nothing. So a sort of safer example maybe is the plumbing code. The state has a plumbing code. It's a state law, and things get changed. So if you were a plumber and you run into this guy and you said, hey, representative, why did the state change the threading on the 38 millimeter valve for oil fittings to 1 turn and a quarter from 3/8 turns and a quarter? They're not going to know that. Now, I would agree with you if what you're saying is, come on, Craig. The number of threads on a fitting, sure, it's state law, but that's too minute. When you're talking about financing and the budget, that drives everything else that state government does, doesn't do, could do. So there's a certain level of expertise or at least interest you expect. So when you bring something up like that, maybe the answer to them would have been, Max, I'm not the expert on this stuff, but this is a pretty interesting conversation. No, you're shaking your head no. He should have had the answer to your question.
Yes.
No,
not that you're playing now Councilman Kelly here.
No.
And yes, you are, because I'm not saying he has to know the threading rates of bolts or anything like that, and you're not saying that he needs to understand the minutia of federal rights and police rights in a state. I'm saying both issues have very fundamental questions. The one I asked about is the government's responsibility to have a plan, have a strategy, have a rationale for very basic issues. So in the unemployment debt, it was like, do we want to keep the debt with the U.S. Treasury and pay its rate, or do we want to have private banks pay their rate? It's a very simple, it's the number one top question. You have to have some sort of rationale for that question. It doesn't have to go into the detail. You just have to say, I looked at the numbers and we felt that private debt would be the most economical going forward. Then I can move on. Same thing when you ask them, what's your plan with ICE? they should say, our main policy right now is to fight it out in the courts, that we're going to let ICE come in and we're going to fight it out in the courts. So if you want to go look at the thing. It is not to say go consult a lawyer and pass the buck on the basic question.
You're missing a huge point here, Max. And my huge point is I was at an ICE event. They were at an ICE event. This wasn't a question that came out of the blue, right? We weren't, meeting by happenstance at the movies, and I asked them. Because they're not all public officials are going to be interested or capable of managing the details of every public event. So my point is, you ran into this guy at a coffee shop.
No, forget about my guy. Let's just talk about your guy. Because your guy is a way more stronger case than what I'm saying, because it's exactly it. You're going to a conference, and this guy is supposed to have some sort of idea, because it's been going on for a while.
Yes.
What the approach is.
So Max, if other people besides you, and by the way, you were right about the bond issue question. Not if he had been getting probably 15 emails and 4 calls and 18 conversations on the streets about the bond issues, you would have expected him to have an answer. Well, Max, I've been looking at this. A lot of people have contacted me. I've read about it on the news, and this is why we did it, right? No one was paying attention besides you, which is unfortunate. But ICE, you can't claim that level of insulation and sort of public ignorance about ICE. They were at this event. It's been on the news forever. We've got rallies all over the place. The National Guard has been mobilized, and National Guard members have been shot.
What he's basically saying is, if ICE shows up to my house, points a gun at me, I'm supposed to go consult a lawyer. I'm supposed to call, hey, Craig, you're the lawyer. Tell me, what should I do now? There's 3 guys with the gun. One's telling me to lay down. One's telling me to put my hands behind my hands. I don't know which order to produce. By the way, they shot the dog, but that's the least of my worries right now. What should I do legally, Craig?
I am in strong agreement with you. If our state leaders cannot give you advice now, I've got 2 cards in my wallet that random people on the street gave me about if ICE knocks on my door, what my rights are. If someone asks me for an ID card, slipping the warrant under the door, and I've been to what to do when you see ICE training and whatnot. That my state reps can't even say, great question, I don't know, but I'm going to follow up on it. I'll get back to you. That would have been okay, but not good. That they couldn't say, we asked that question and we're waiting for a response, but it's a really important issue. That's bad. That they couldn't say, we've been working on this since day one, and here's a 5-point plan, and it's right there on our website. By the way, I poked around both the city and the state's website. I can't figure out what anyone's responsibility are, whether it's DOJ, it could be the FBI. The FBI has become, basically another police force. Police is the wrong word because that establishes some sort of authority. It's become a retribution force, stormtroopers, just doing his will. So if they come and they're trying to execute a warrant that is unlawful just because Trump signed it, or the perfect example is ICE has got some secret memo that says they don't need a warrant to knock down your door. What the F, right?
Exactly.
So these ICE agents break down your door, and the cops show up, and what are they supposed to do? It's a lawless search. That was why America as a country got, for all its faults, and there are plenty of them, especially if you're a Native American or a black person, you've been living that history, right? But for us white people, the thought that ICE can come in, knock down our door, is it going to be the IRS next? Seeing if you got tax stamps on your liquor, well, you're going to do what? You're going to say, hey, Arlington Police, these 3 masked men with guns just knocked on, and they're going to show up, and what are they going to do? They don't have guidance. They don't have guidance because the people in power are not providing it, and that's where we are in Minnesota, partially. So you put Walsh puts the National Guard on standby for what? What are they supposed to do? What are these local sheriffs supposed to do? And they don't need. And I was a Marine for a long time, and I've got a strong sort of public safety affinity. I like organizations. You can't in the moment, tell the cop to go out, or 2 cops or 10 cops, to go out and interact with ICE in a certain way. You have to have trained them before them. You have to have given them guidance. You have to help them understand you've got their back when stuff goes wrong. So that the one guy that shows up in the 4 ICE agents, you're not thinking ahead. Like the cops aren't automations. They need to be supported and trained by their communities, and they're people like anyone else. So there will be mistakes made. But right now we're not even thinking about it. It's horrible.
Well, exactly. I mean, if they can't even answer your question, right, informally.
No, Max, it's worse than that. It wasn't that they couldn't answer the question. It's that they didn't take responsibility for answering the question.
Well, that's what I meant. If they can't.
No, that's not what you said. It's worse than what you said. Right. You're the lawyer. You figure it out. Like anyone at the National Guard is going to answer my questions, right?
Right. All right, Craig. Well, that's been a fun one.
It has been a fun one. I will end on this note. It was 6 degrees when we wrapped up this morning. We're out at Mass Ave, Route 16, from 8 to 9. Snow on the ground, 6 degrees, high temperature. We had 11 people out there, as cold as it was. Massive amounts of honking and so forth. And it wasn't until I was literally right down the street, biking to your house, that I had some guy, and it's always the same guy. It's always a white, heavy-set guy driving who rolls the window down on the passenger side, somehow stretches 15 feet in the car, takes their eyes off the road and yells at me, "You effer, blah, 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 loser." Always the same guy. So that happened literally 100 yards from here. And to me, that means we're getting the dialogue going in a more positive direction, where people like that are feeling like they have to respond. But when they do respond in a bad way, the local authorities need to understand what their role is in keeping me or you or whoever safe. Because, if I got to start carrying a gun around, it just increases the danger for everyone. We'll talk about guns more in the future, but no one wants me to have a gun, no matter how good I am with it. Well, I mean, maybe Kyle Rittenhouse does, but we don't want to take our public policy discussions from him.
Yes, when the guy jumps out of the car with a tire iron and starts chasing you, then please consult your lawyer.
Exactly. All right, Max. Well, I'll call you first. Better call Max.
Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Bye-bye.